Carlton King is a former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for free.
My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations, but actually, in reality, majors in on geopolitics. And often we do this via a guest that we have on the show, or guests who basically explain what the circumstances are in their particular profession. Connect that then with the circumstances in the world in general. So what we get to feel is how things really are in this world. Now today, I'm actually going to deal with something that everybody's dealing with, and it's something that I could not deal with. It's basically the situation we have presently in the United Kingdom. And that situation is one of farce. And one might even say in some circumstances that it's a Greek tragedy. It's a situation whereby we've just had a Prime Minister for 44 days. She has resigned because of basically putting together a system whereby what she tried to do via her Chancellor was to put forward a plan within the Treasury, so within the nation at large, without having, as is now the norm, the OBE look over the plans to see if they fit within the market. By the market, I mean, obviously, the monetary markets, the gilts and so on and so forth. Now, why did they do that? I believe they did that because they felt they could get away with it. And what I mean by getting away with it was, we just had a Prime Minister prior to Liz Truss who lost his role as Prime Minister because he stuck to none of the rules. So because you had abroad, if you will, a feeling that anybody could do what they wish to do, Liz Truss, as Prime Minister, then allowed her Chancellor to put forward this idea of how we were going to function, which earlier on, Rishi Sunak, and this is in the competition they had solely only within the Conservative Party, to become head of the party and hence Prime Minister, that basically she allowed this to happen because she felt a rogue Prime Minister, and yeah, I understand exactly what I'm saying, had been able to push forward many, many policies and ideas, and indeed kick back on some of the things that he had done incorrectly by just not working to the system. So therefore, it was easy, she felt, for her to put forward this primary and major policy without having it checked by the group of experts who are meant to understand what monetary policy is. Now, the reason why I mention the word experts is because, as you may well remember, in the Brexit vote, it was said that experts are getting in the way of everything and experts don't understand how things function. Indeed, expertise became a dirty word within that process. And it, in a way, allowed Boris Johnson to win the role because he was able to say experts don't know what they're talking about. So then why should the next Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and her Chancellor actually give experts the chance to look at their work? And, by the way, they knew that what they would say is this will not get past the market. Now, how did they know it wouldn't get past the market? Because some 3 days before the mini-budget was put out, with the foreseen processes that they wanted to put forward, there had been a meeting with some of the higher echelons within the City of London. And it is reported, and I was not there so I can't say that's correct, that they'd said this will not fly. But nevertheless, it was put forward, and that is what happened at that particular time. And we all know the run on the pound was a result of that, and we all know that the markets perceived Britain's Chancellor and the Prime Minister to be basically illiterate in terms of how market practices function. Now, whether that is correct or not is immaterial. It may well be that they came up with an idea that was sufficiently sound to function in some way, shapes or means. But of course what they tried to do was book a system that is in place in the world today for every country practically other than, and this is the point, other than the United States. So in other words, they may have been following some of the aspects, and from what I can see they were, that had taken place in the United States, but without United States power. And I think, by the way, that is a real problem for the UK. We've been trying to mimic the United States in many ways. Just look at what we've been doing in the Ukraine, in terms of the assistance to the Ukraine, without the power of the United States. So therefore the price we pay then is problematic to us, whereas the price being paid by the United States is not as great because it's a much more powerful state. Nobody is going to call the dollar in because then you undermine the whole system. But you can easily call the pound in because it has no ratcheting power within the system, particularly since we've left the European Union. So what I also want to mention then is, yes, the dreaded Brexit. And a lot of Britons say, oh, we're fed up of Brexit, we don't want to hear about it, we don't want to know. Well, one of the problems, I believe, is because Britons too often are apathetic in terms of politics, it leads to politicians being able to say things that are just blatantly untrue. And much of the British public, because it doesn't want to listen to political perspectives and political understanding, means that they can get away with what's being said and done without actually assessing what it means for them and the country. So let's look at this. Let's look at Brexit, because I think it's important. And what I will say is, you could listen to a 19-minute podcast I did way back in 2015 when the Brexit vote was passed through by Cameron, and he said that it would take place in 2016. I actually did a 19-minute videoed version of my perspective of what would happen post-Brexit when we left the European Union. Now, it's quite interesting. You hear what I just said, when we left the European Union. Because I knew, you can listen to the podcast, I knew that that would be the outcome. Why did I know that? Because basically the real issue of what they were selling Brexit on was the, I'm going to say it in the most basic way I can, of getting rid of foreigners. Now, what happened is that in many ways the British public understood that once we have Brexit, there will be no more foreigners. And in many ways, for many Britons, it meant there'll be no more black and brown faces. Now, in that 2015 podcast, what I actually said is Brexit will mean a greater number of black and brown faces. Because what will happen is that those from within the European Union will no longer feel welcome. They will revert to the 450 million European Union body, which isn't going anywhere, contrary to what many Brexiteers wanted to believe that somehow Britain leaving would cause the rest of countries to leave. It will not. And I said that there and then. Indeed, what I said is that the likelihood is that when Brexit vote is won for leave, that Britain, the United Kingdom, will become the rump Britain. And what I mean by that is that Scotland would leave the Union with the United Kingdom, because the thing that kept it in the 2014 vote was that if Scotland left the Union of the United Kingdom, it would not be able to enter the European Union. However, once the UK, as a greater body, left the European Union, then, of course, if Scotland then said we voted not to leave, which is the case, and which I knew it would be, we voted not to leave, but other parts of the United Kingdom voted to leave, so we wish to take the United Kingdom's place in the Union, I believed, and still believe, that the Scots will be basically entered into the European Union in quick time with open arms. Because their argument will be, we were forced out of the Union beyond our control. Why would that not have washed before? Because states like Catalonia and Corsica in France and various others that want to split off from the bigger body, in the case of Corsica, France, and in the case of Spain, Catalonia, they would not be allowed to do that because they didn't want such smaller countries to break off and then be part of the European Union, because it undermines some of the primary countries within the European Union. However, if a large country leaves the European Union and part of that large country, Scotland, wishes then to rejoin, then there's an argument that says it should rejoin actually very, very easily because it never wished to leave. And I think that argument will collect water, and I think you'll find that if Scotland chooses to leave the Union, which I believe it will with the United Kingdom, that it will easily re-enter the European Union, which for the Scots will be actually very advantageous. So that was one reason. I thought Scotland would leave. I also said in that 19-minute podcast that Northern Ireland would then likely leave, not because of the Protestant body within Northern Ireland that is very loyalist and wishes to remain and stay within the United Kingdom. Absolutely, that's a given. However, what will happen is that some deal must be made, and I said it there, whereby they can still function, and the Good Friday Agreement can still function together, because if not, there will be terrorism. And so therefore, some overhang, I didn't know what it would be in place to allow for Northern Ireland to function with the Republic. That, in time, would lead to Northern Ireland unifying with the Republic, or if not unifying with the Republic, actually voting to leave the United Kingdom, because the birth rate of Catholics is higher than that of Protestants. So if you're looking at pure voting aspects alone, that would be one of the elements to it. Plus also, I believe that many more Protestants, for want of a better word, if you want to look at the religious aspect of it, frankly would think that in the end they're better off within and I'm relating it to the younger people now, not the older people, and it's also some of the younger people, and you don't need all of them by any means, because you've got a Catholic majority you will have in some time, a nationalist majority, if you want to use the word nationalist majority, who will then wish to come together or be part of a singular Northern Ireland within the European Union, because that is advantageous to them. So that was my argument. I actually at the time said I didn't know what would happen with Wales. Indeed, I erred on the angle of caution and said that I felt Wales would actually stay within the Union of the United Kingdom. So that would be the rump, which I call Britain, that would be left. So England and Wales. Now, I may be wrong about that, because the Welsh may in time turn around and say, we also wish to leave, because particularly the Northern Welsh would feel that they were, if you will, and this was also went for the Scots and for the Northern Irish, that they were then conditioned and directed solely by the English, because the Union of the United Kingdom is an unequal union. 3/4 of that union is England, and so the power structures are England. Now, once you're within the European Union, that made no great difference, because there were other power structures out with the unified state of Great Britain. But once you are a Northern Ireland, once you are outside of the European Union, then it is the English who then control all of the aspects. It's the West Lothian question backwards, if you will. And so therefore that then becomes a problem for people who have a kingdom, nationalist feel for their kingdoms, Ireland, Wales, whatever. So that is a problem for the United Kingdom. Now, why do I mention all of this? Because you're going to say, that's all spilt milk. I thought you were talking about this government. I am. That's the problem, because all of this plays into how the government is functioning, how Boris had to function, things that they had to leave and pretend weren't happening because they're trying to shore up the union in many ways. Things that were undemocratic. Example, we're not going to give the Scots the opportunity to have a referendum. Well, if you were meant to be democratic, surely that opportunity would be in place. So, and this is the type of thing that we were saying to the Spanish, why are you not giving the opportunity for Catalonia to have its vote? But yet still now we find we don't want to give that opportunity to the Scots. So it all lends itself to a system where we weren't trying to put out fires previously within the European Union. Now we're having to put those fires out in our own union, and therefore we're having to function in a manner that makes the government less conducive to listening to what its citizens are saying within all corners of the Union of the United Kingdom. And that then leads to governments, the executive of the United Kingdom, thinking it can do as it wishes, but also puts at loggerheads the parts of the United Kingdom against other parts of the United Kingdom. And we have then a situation whereby the good of the nation in general isn't coming to the fore ahead of everything else. Now, it gets even worse. We get minister upon minister upon minister, and what you need to understand, and I'll just orientate listeners to how the United Kingdom functions, particularly those who are not in the UK. As in most countries, we have a legislature which we call Parliament and the House of Lords. It's a two-tiered legislature system. The House of Lords being individuals who either have their role as a lord via a hereditary position, i.e. that their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a lord or a knight and therefore they have the lord's title, or we have it via a situation whereby, as we came into the 70s, 80s, 90s, less and less hereditary lords were being made, but lords were being made by political parties to stack that particular body to its advantage. So therefore they were making more and more lords in the House of Lords, and its capacity now is massive in terms of the numbers who are lords. I believe second only Lords and Commons to China, which is a country of 1.5 billion people rather than 63 million. So there is an imbalance there somewhere, as you can see. And this is because of political patronage. So you've got that, the legislature. You've got the judiciary, which has a sitting in the United Kingdom, but is independent from the rest of the body of state. However, you have a Lord Chancellor who can orientate things in the judiciary based on elements of government. That is possibly the case as in most of the countries. And then you have the executive, and the executive is obviously the government of the day. And the government is made up of the party that has the vast majority of people who it's got in our first-past-the-post system. So it's not a proportional representation system in the elections for a general election, albeit that it is proportional representation in some parts of the United Kingdom for, if you will, well, you can't call them local, you can call them national governments, or Scottish government, Welsh government, Northern Ireland government, Stormont. So they work on a proportional perspective, and you have to get X amount past the post. But in our general election for the country's unitary body, basically it's first past the post. So effectively, you can rule in the United Kingdom by getting about 28% of the vote, and you can still be the majority party. That in itself is problematic when you look at what democracy is meant to be. So it means that you could have 72% of the nation not voting for your party, but you are the biggest party and run everything because it's first past the post system. So again, that's problematic. Why do I mention this? Because, again, another problem we have is that our system is now no longer fit for purpose. And I think the fact that we've just had 4 prime ministers and potentially are going to get back a prime minister who was thrown out but 6 months ago because half of his cabinet, indeed in the end it was something like 6% of his cabinet, had rejected him as the leader. Basically said they had no confidence in him and he was a charlatan. But this man may now come back into power. I'm not going to say he is. And at the time of recording, he's only got openly stated 56 votes of the 100 that he requires. Albeit that he has just returned from the Dominican Republic with his protection team in tow, and brought him back so he can stand, if he gets the required numbers, to be able to put forward his, I guess, will be a new government if he was chosen by the vast majority of the Tory Party again. And then Tory voters. Now, understand Tory, by the way, for those who don't understand the language, is the Conservative Party of the United Kingdom, which has been the most successful party in the United Kingdom for ever and a day, to be fair. Why? Because it's one of the grand old parties, used to be the Whigs and the Conservatives, one of the grand old parties, because that party has over time taken in many different people from many different thoughts, views and ideas about how the country should be run, but that are right of centre. Whereas the Labour Party, quite a new party in comparison to the Conservative Party, has always had the party central to left of centre. And it's a party that relates itself, as it says, to Labour. So the moment that Labour is not something that feels itself a threat and people feel that they look for growth, you can see why many normal everyday people may vote for the Conservative when the Conservative Party argues it is the party of growth, it is the party of less taxes, it is the party of aspiration. So anybody who begins to aspire oftentimes thinks, Conservative Party's for me. And if you wish to become a politician, then often that's what happens. Those aspiring individuals move towards that party. Now, that is its advantage, its strength, but it's also its downfall, because within that very broad church, there are sections that today, at least, are an anathema to other sections. And this is what you saw with Brexit. Again, we come back to Brexit because it's very, very important. a person whose protection I used to run, Sir John Majors, a man who did not swear as a general rule, but was pushed to swearing, and I must admit, light swearing, when he was in Parliament and he was the head of government, when in those days they called what is now the Brexit element of the party, they call them the Eurosceptics, and the Eurosceptics were forcing his hand and pushing him out of power. Now, again, what had happened is, before the 2016 vote to leave the European Union, this wart on the Conservative Party that had not been lanced by John Major and others then began to grow extremely large within the Conservative Party and out with the Conservative Party, because you had a man called Nigel Farage who had his own party, which was stealing some of the funder of the Conservative Party, this broad church. This body was stealing his funder and his ideals, and many Britons, working class Britons, who were aspirational in many ways, or were told that they were aspirationals, or informed that foreigners were taking their jobs, started to vote for Farage's party. And because of that, what happened is that many Conservatives became fearful that they would lose their seats, and spoke again about the problem of the European Union. And it was such a level that actually, I think personally, I would say, another man whose protection team I ran was, at the time of 2010 elections, became the Foreign Secretary for the Conservative Party when they actually had an election vote which left them with the capacity to work in tandem with another party. That party was the Lib Dems. They came into power but were the more powerful element of that party. So William Hague, the man who then became the Foreign Secretary, whom I was running his protection team for, made a lot of the negotiations with the Lib Dems. Now, my argument is that Labour could have made negotiations with the Lib Dems as well and created a party. But Gordon Brown decided not to. Big mistake from Gordon Brown, I believe. He should have brought in the Lib Dems. Anyway, along with Clegg, who became the Deputy Prime Minister, Cameron the Prime Minister, and William Hague as the Foreign Secretary, they coupled together a government. Now, what Lib Dems were able to do was basically water down some of the principles of what the Conservative Party would have done. But for that, they paid a price, because they were seen by other Britons as having lied. And for whatever reason, the Conservatives were able to push on to them all of the negatives when the next election came around. But fearing Nigel Farage, fearing the split from the Eurosceptics, what Cameron said, and believing he would not win the election outright, and therefore could bargain away something, he actually said, if we win the election, we will have a vote to see whether Britain should remain in the European Union. Now, I believe Cameron never felt that he would win that election outright, and he felt that that election would again be won with the help of the Lib Dems, and therefore he could argue then to those Eurosceptics in his party that I had to bargain this position away, because the Lib Dems would have never let him basically have a vote as to whether we should stay within the European Union. Now, Cameron won that election. Surprisingly, it surprised him. He won it. And so therefore, the first thing that these Eurosceptics, as they were then, now we call them Brexiteers, were they said to him, right, now we want our vote. And Cameron had to give it them, he felt. Well, the reality is he didn't. The reality is he could have done many things. He could have said, OK, it's a vote based on a percentage, and you have to get over X amount of a threshold before you win, before you take your serious. It's a vote which is only a vote which we will consider. It did not have to be a binding vote. There could have been a whole host of ways he could have got around it. He chose not to. All because he wanted to keep the party intact. This very broad church, which is now, before everybody's eyes, falling apart. So that's why we needed to go over that history of the past to understand where it was. Now, also what I will say is, during that election, that vote for Brexit, the Conservatives, because they are the aspirational party, because they are the party that says we're the party of business, because, stupidly, I believe, Cameron gave every MP the right to vote, and even his government the right to vote as they will, so the executive, his government the right to vote as it wished within that. You had the government split down the line as to whether they would wish to Brexit or not. Now, I would say that any right-thinking person who was a politician knew that for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union was, if you will, an act of suicide. Or if not suicide, it lamed the country. It was the biggest self-destructive aspect that any person, any politician could do. Which is why every former Prime Minister said, do not Brexit, and went out there. But the problem was, you see, for Cameron, is if he actually told the truth about the UK's economy, about the UK's capacity to grow out with the European Union, never mind within it, well, it was better, but out with the European Union, people would say, well, why do we not grow at the same level as Germany? And because people don't understand politics and wish not to, we're going all the way back around now, wish not to be informed about politics, or think in Britain often it's a bad thing to do in company to speak politics. Yeah, we don't discuss issues. And because we don't discuss issues, we don't understand. So we have several massive misconceptions. We have a misconception that says, example, that the Commonwealth is something that we run and we do a whole load of trade with the Commonwealth, and it's basically like the colonies when we took everything out of the colonies that we required and basically didn't, in the old pre-independence Commonwealth, we basically took the goods we needed. It acted as a vast monopoly. We could sell our goods into the Commonwealth at our prices, and we could get the raw materials generally out of the Commonwealth at our prices, and therefore it was an excellent body for us to run with. Because it wasn't a Commonwealth, it was in a colonial system. Right. Now it's a Commonwealth, it doesn't work like that. Indeed, you can look at the vast majority of the Commonwealth. I think, for example, India does 6 times the trade with Germany than it does with the United Kingdom. I think Australia does something like 4 times the trade with Germany than it does with the United Kingdom. These are Commonwealth countries, right? And Germany's never been part of the Commonwealth. Indeed, both India and Australia, fighting on the side of the United Kingdom, both of them fought against Germany. But Germany does way more trade with them than we do, okay? But that's not told to anybody. It was also the case, and I remember the picture and I can see it blatantly. We had minis lined up and with a Union Jack painted on the top of the roof, and we had Cameron standing there saying, our British car industry will find it more difficult. Our British car industry, and he had minis all lined up. Well, the mini is BMW, which has zero to do with Great Britain, other than it may well be produced here in some of the factories in Britain. But that's akin to saying that Ford, Vauxhall, which is Opel, as you know, in other countries, Peugeot, Toyota, which are all produced in South African factories, are South African companies. Well, they're not, are they? They're companies of France, they're companies of Japan, and companies of Germany. So the point is that just because you produce a car here, in terms of you assembling it, doesn't mean to say it's anything to do with your country. Because the country it belongs to are the country who controls it. And that goes for, the Rolls-Royce car, which is synonymous, and we call it a British brand now. Notice we use the word brand. It's a British brand because it's not a British company. And that goes for very much of what we now produce. Very much of what we produce in the United Kingdom. Stuff is assembled here in the United Kingdom, but is owned out with the United Kingdom, often in Europe, often in Germany, and obviously for cars in Japan. Now, why is that important? Because these companies site their assembly factories, etc., in the United Kingdom because it provided them 9 times out of 10 with access to a market of 500 million people. But now it doesn't, does it? Now it only provides them with access to a market of 63 million people. And the cars that then go out to that, what used to be a 500 million people market, which is now a 450 million people market, which is the European Union, are now taxed. Okay? That's our problem. So we become non-competitive as a nation in which we should cite, in which other countries cite the assembly and the propositions that they wish to sell on out with the UK market. And to be fair, there's very few things that people just want to sell within the UK market. Why would you? You know, as Henry Ford said, expand or die. So if you want to sell your goods, whatever they are, you want to sell it into all markets. And the bigger market, the better. Now we come to the argument and say, yes, but we can get trade deals. Yes, we can get trade deals with other countries. But you know, we had trade deals with many other countries via the European Union. Now you're going to have people say, that took ages to get these trade deals. Yes, it did. Why? Because the European Union is 27 other states, and all those states have a say. Yes, but the same strength of that is that all those states have massive bargaining power against the state that they're making the trade deal with. So if you're Japan and you make a trade deal with the European Union, because you can access with one fell swoop, one sign of the pen, 27 other nations, you can access them all with just one signature. You want that trade with them, and you will lose and miss out some of the aspirational elements that you might have for your trade in terms of giving you more powerful bargaining power. You leave that alone because the European Union gives you a great opportunity to sell all your goods. Plus something even cruder. The United States has massive bargaining power because it has a GDP of something in the region of 19 trillion, which dwarfs every other singular nation, but for the Chinese, which was about 13.5 trillion. The next single nation after that is Japan, with about 4.8 trillion. And then the next one after that is Germany, with a GDP of about 4.2 trillion. And then it drops. And it drops to the UK or France, because they both go one after the other nigh on, very close to each other, with about 2.7, 2.8. And sometimes France is more, sometimes less. Now, actually, since Brexit, generally France is higher than we are. So you can see that as singular nations, we cannot bargain with the United States or China. Now, as the European Union, however, that GDP is 16 trillion. So all of a sudden, putting all these nations together as the EU, they then have bigger bargaining power than everybody other than the United States. And even the United States has got to listen to it because its GDP is only a couple of trillion more, rather than tens of trillions more when you go with singular nations, other than China, of course. So what I'm saying is, yes, Trump did not like the European Union because it was a threat to the United States, and he was America first. Because the European Union as a singular body could nigh on challenge the United States. Britain will never challenge the United States. So he was totally happy for Britain to be separate with a 2.7 trillion against his 19 trillion. But he isn't happy for the 16 trillion of the European Union. That's a threat. So the British people had to understand this as to why the union was extremely important. We also now understand, or should understand, that this is why our Prime Minister involved himself in the situation in the Ukraine. Because inside the European Union, Great Britain was very powerful. It had a large GDP, not as large as Germany, but was as large as the next biggest one down, France, and larger than Italy, and larger than Spain, etc. So it was powerful within the European Union. And English is a language that people like to utilise. So it had a lot of powerful roles within the European Union. Catherine Ashton, whom I know quite well, was the Foreign Secretary of the European Union, effectively. I used to see her a lot of the time when I was out around the world. So the powers we had within the European Union, we ran Europol. We were that had the main bench in some of the other roles within the European Union, primary roles, like justice example. So we were doing very, very well. So to leave now, all of a sudden, we need somewhere to go. Because who are we? Yes, we still have our seat in the UN. But, you know, when we had our seat in the UN previously, we had the whole of the European Union behind us. Now we just sit alone. And please don't say we've got the Commonwealth behind us. We have not. Because the Commonwealth is not a unified body in any way, shape or means. So please do understand that. And I did something on Commonwealth a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking about the death of Her Majesty the Queen. So I'm not going to go back into the Commonwealth again. But please do understand, we do not control the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth does not give us any real power. The Commonwealth sat with us, or the countries within the Commonwealth sat with us when we were part of the European Union because it was to their advantage, and they liked maybe the fact that Britain could argue the Commonwealth's position or the Commonwealth countries' position within the European Union. Now it's not within the European Union. Again, where's the interest? Tick, gone. That means we've lost power within the Commonwealth. India's GDP is reaching our GDP. So India soon is as powerful. So what I'm saying is we have given up a lot and frankly received nothing, and I state it, nothing back. And if you listen to my 19-minute video blog that I did, as I said, before the vote, stating that the vote would go down as it did, because they were using the immigration line, then you'll see what I'm saying. Because I mentioned everything that would happen. So it is no surprise to me that the government is falling away. It is no surprise to me that the government cannot control the ebbs and flows of the UK's economy, because it no longer has the levers that it had before when we were in the Union. It has lost, example, Euro trading, which was trillions. You know, it has gone to some other parts of what we used to be in the European Union, with France taking some of it, Paris to be precise, with some of it going to Frankfurt. In fact, some of it even going across the water to the United States and to Singapore. So we've lost out. We've lost position. And this is why Boris wished to go to the Ukraine, because he needed the UK to be perceived to be doing something where the world could say, the UK counts. But that doesn't make it count, because we provide weapons that we can ill afford to provide, by the way, to the Ukraine, that extends a war, which in the end, and I said it before because I did a whole programme on the Ukraine, in the end, the Russians, in some way, shape or means, they will not attack us, but that's not the way the world's going to work. But in some other shape or means, will exact a price from us. And it will be problematic for the United Kingdom down the line, because they can't make that problematic for the United States. So you need to understand that again. And we want to raise our military spending by another percentage point to 3%. Well, why would we? We can't run our health service as it is now. Why do we want to raise military spending? This is why, because we've got nothing else. We've got nothing else that we can say, hey, look at what we're doing. We're not manufacturing hardly anything. We're not creating anything. Our services are falling away because our services were working within the European Union as English-speaking services. Now they're speaking English coming out of Ireland and running those services. So even the service industry is paying the price for it. You know, music. People say, oh, well, what's music? Movies. All of these industries worked and aided and assisted in the United Kingdom when it was in the European Union. Now musicians say, we can't play in the European Union. It's too problematic for us. So that undermines that part of our economy that actually was doing very, very well. So indeed, the economy is taking hits from every corner because of the Brexit vote. And a government that is unable to admit this is now in free flow about finding any other reason it can, but for the reason why it's in free flow, because, as it was said by the chair of the Defence Committee, to mention Brexit in the Tory Party is akin to slitting your own throat. It means you will be extremely unpopular. It means you will lose power within the party. So it's not mentioned. So what you have then is, everybody knows the elephant sits in the room who's a politician. It seems to me that many members of the public do not, because they just saw it of getting rid of foreigners. Well, as I started this by saying, yes, you may well have got rid of a lot of European foreigners, but because the United Kingdom needs the labour, it cannot get rid of foreigners coming from elsewhere. Indeed, it has gone out since Brexit to drag people into the United Kingdom from many other parts of the world where people happen to be black and brown. Now, do I have a problem with that? No, I don't, because I'm black myself. But the people who voted for Brexit, many of them do. Many of them do. So the problem is, what they voted for is to bring more people in by the back door. But the government won't tell you this. They will harp on about a few hundred people coming across the sea on a boat. Listen, all countries get that. And to be fair, the countries with the biggest amount of refugees in their countries, in the millions, are countries like South Africa, got about 2 million in, like Turkey, got about 1.5 million in. You have countries like the Lebanon, that's got a lot of refugees in. Countries like Kenya, who can't afford it really, have 1 million refugees in their country. Right? Because refugees tend to go into the nearest country next to them. It is an anathema. It is an untruth to say that the vast majority of refugees end up coming to Europe, because they do not, or the United States or wherever. They actually go to the next country next to them. That's where they land in, and that's where they generally stay, because most of them don't have the money to move on. Right? So, making Brexit will not lose you those few hundreds or thousands coming across. Let's say it's 10,000, which it isn't, but let's say it is. It will not lose you those 10,000 coming across. That will not change. Indeed, it might be even worse, because whereas before the French were willfully stopping people coming across because it was in their interest, because there was an agreement within the European Union, now there is no agreement, and there definitely isn't the brotherly love within the Union for that to be stopped. So therefore, it may well be, I'm not saying it is, half-hearted actions taken by the French to stop those people coming across, if they so wished. And they definitely won't have them back. Whereas under the European Union system, they could well have them back. Now they definitely will not. So again, the politician isn't telling you the truth. You're bringing more people in that would not have been in before, and even the few refugees, and I'm saying few because in relations to populations it is few, coming across are, frankly, coming across because we're no longer in the Union. And the European people who used to have working here in Britain, who used to be doing a job here in Britain, you can't get these people now. So various industries are falling away. Entertainment. You find that a lot of people used to work in bars and restaurants, etc., and were happy to do the work in the long term, not only in the short term. Yeah. Gone. And this is the price of Brexit. And this is what's bringing this government to its knees time and time and time again. And it will not stop, even if Rishi Sunak wins it, and even if he understands the policies that work within economics, because it's not just an economic problem. It's a political problem, a geopolitical problem, which has been created by the Brexit process. So I'll leave you with this. Why did Ted Heath wish for us to enter the European Union? Which was then, of course, the EEC, the European Economic Community. Why? Because he knew. And why did de Gaulle attempt to stop us from coming in? Because they both men knew that it was the only game in town. And the French wanted to stop us entering the Union because up until that point, it was probably the most powerful body within there. Germany has since taken over, but it was the most powerful economic and military body within it at the time. And so that was de Gaulle wishing for the French to stay in power. And Ted Heath wished for us to come in because he knew that that was the only way we could grow. Because with loss of empire, we could no longer grow by basically dumping goods into empire without anybody having anything to say about it. So we were not dragged into the European Union. The European Union was the nirvana. The European Union, as it was then the EC, was the sunlit uplands. That was what was providing us with opportunity. Ted Heath saw that, a Tory. Margaret Thatcher saw that, a Tory. Yeah. Sir John Major saw that, a Tory. So, this is what I'm saying. They knew that for us to grow, our best and easiest opportunity was to have a mass market that was open to us. And that is why, and I'm going to leave you with this, that is why even people like Daniel Hannan, an arch Brexiteer, his argument always was that we would stay within some type of process, and I'm saying it in this way, that would allow us access to the single market and the customs union. Now, I don't know how he was going to do that, how he was going to square that by saying that we wouldn't have any freedom of movement, or we wouldn't have the European Court running us, because those are two direct elements of being in those bodies. But if we're not in those bodies, we cannot sell our goods to our nearest partners. And anybody who knows anything about business and any international business knows that is what is happening right now. That we are not able to do that. And frankly, we've left ourselves wide open to be then entered by US companies who are buying us up, from the National Health Service to many of the good startups that are being bought up by US services, because there's nowhere to go for them just within inside the United Kingdom. And by the way, as I said before, that United Kingdom is now at threat. So ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much. This was a special. It was a special about government, but it's going into the reasons why government is imploding and the reasons why I believe changing the government, or the head of government, basically the Prime Minister, and moving the chairs around within the executive, within government, is not going to change how we function. It's not going to change, because we cannot access what we're required to access in order to obtain the growth that we should have, and we won't grow without that. But nobody wants to have the real question about the elephant in the room, which is, how do we re-enter the European Union in some way? Now they're going to say to you, "Oh, we only want to enter the customs union, and we only want to enter the free market." Well, ladies and gentlemen, with that comes freedom of movement, and every person who wishes from the European Union, who wishes to domicile themselves here in the United Kingdom, who wishes to work in the United Kingdom, will have an absolute right to do so. Now, I've got no problem with that, because it gave us the absolute right to live, work and spend our monies freely as we wished in 27 other lands. What was the problem with that? For our children to grow in 27 other lands, for our children to go to school, to go to university free in 27 other lands. What was the problem with that? Now we don't have that possibility, and we will not grow without it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and hopefully you'll listen again next week.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, And don't forget to subscribe for free.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
In the quarter of a century, I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.